It started with static garbled noise from the edge of Terran Expansion Zone 9, barely a blip in the deep space channels. Most operators didn't even notice it at first. Just another old relay misfiring near a gravitational wake. But then came the signal, distorted, weak, but unmistakably human. A child's voice, sobbing, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "We didn't do anything. Please help us." The message cut out after 12 seconds. By the time Earthfleet Command verified its origin, it was already too late. The human colony of Astorvale population 900,000 had gone dark. No life signs, no transmissions, no power. Just silence and ash, where a thriving, peaceful world had stood. Astorvale had been one of the crown jewels of Terran settlement efforts, a planet rich with green valleys, twin moons, and skies lit with gold. Families had moved there in waves. Engineers, teachers, farmers, dreamers. The colony was protected by a minimal defense grid, enough to hold back pirates or local threats, but nothing more. It wasn't a war front. It wasn't a threat. It was just home. And now it was gone. The first Terran scout ship arrived 3 days after the signal. The crew never even made landfall. Their scans told them enough. Craters dozens of kilometers wide. Melted infrastructure. Radiation too high for suits. Orbit littered with hull fragments. Not Terran, not local. Foreign weapon signatures marked the atmosphere, pointing to a strike pattern precise and deliberate. This hadn't been a war. It had been an execution. The data returned to Earth within hours. The names of the lost colonists began to scroll. Across Terran networks, families screamed. Protests erupted. And then, the screens went black. A message appeared on every display. Plain text. White letters on a dark field. Do not mourn. We are not done. Across Earth's orbital defense ring, hangars opened. Black armored personnel moved in silence. Emergency conscription protocols were unlocked. Within 24 hours, 77 warships launched from Sol alone, silent, sleek, and armed. To the teeth. Earth didn't wait for permission from the Galactic Council. They didn't request investigation. They already knew who was responsible. The Koran Combine, an empire of biosynthetic raiders that roamed the edge of known space had long evaded direct confrontation with the Deathworlders. They fed on weak colonies, attacked distant settlements, never leaving enough proof for retribution. But this time they had gone too far. They had wiped out a registered Terran colony under full protection of the Human Expansion Charter. Earth's charter didn't allow negotiation after that. It required response. Operation Eclipse was activated from a sealed vault code used only once before, during the Second Jovian Uprising. But this time, the target wasn't rogue humans. It was something far worse. And it required more than just vengeance. It required demonstration. Terran intelligence had already tracked the signal trail back to Koran space. Dozens of hive worlds. Massive orbital foundries. No central capital. Just floating nests of war that moved like shadows. But humans had learned from past wars. And they had grown patient. In the void beyond Mars, the largest fleet Earth had ever assembled began to move. Over 300 ships. Carriers, gunships, dreadnoughts, stealth frigates. Every vessel painted in matte black with no identifiers. Their drives activated in silence. No broadcasts, no threats. Just dark engines humming with power. From the surface, civilians looked up at the night sky and saw strange shadows moving across the stars. So many, so large, that the constellations shifted. Some wept. Others watched in silence. And still others whispered what the old veterans called them, the Stardark Fleet. Every officer aboard knew the same thing. This wasn't a battle. This was a reckoning. Earth had been quiet for too long. Let the galaxy call them brutal. Let them call it disproportionate. That didn't matter. Now, what mattered was the message. That the loss of Astorvale would not be forgotten. That the cost of innocent lives would be paid back with interest not far across space. The Coron Combine had no idea what was coming. Their scout ships monitored Terran space, but saw only minor fleet movement, nothing unusual. Their leadership assumed the humans would protest at the Council or threaten sanctions. They had grown comfortable, arrogant. They didn't realize that Earth had stopped waiting. The Coron warbroods that struck Astorvale celebrated their success, consuming the last human data cores as trophies, broadcasting encrypted victory songs through blooded bandwidths. They didn't know Earth had already triangulated the source, that every burst of Coron transmission was another lock clicked into place, another gate opened, another knife sharpened out, and then one morning their outer listening post at Zar 7 went silent. No explosion, no alert, just gone. Then it happened. Again, Zar 8, Zar 5. Whole relay chains fell dark. The Coron mind collectives began to stir uneasily. But by the time they mobilized, it was too late. Because from the deep black came the first shadow. Not a fleet a wall. A moving shape, kilometers wide, drifting silently with no heat signature. They fired at it. Nothing hit. The object kept coming, and then the sky began to burn. The Coron Combine had faced wars before. They had crushed border rebellions, fought skirmishes with the Sakari clans, and outlasted the long siege of the Baruth Spiral. They knew war, but not like this. Not like the humans brought it. The first impact wasn't even from a weapon. It was a signal encoded, silent, and ancient. A Terran death code, something not used in centuries. It carried no threat, no ultimatum, just the names. 900,000 names. Names of men, women, and children from Astorvale. One by one, each name flashed through Coron systems, flooding their neural cores and broadcast servers, until their network began to collapse under the strain of grief it couldn't understand. The Combine did not feel sorrow, but it saw it now burned into their memory banks like a curse. And before they could recover, the sky tore open. Terran fleet strikes were not battles, they were surgical catastrophes. The first wave dropped in from microjumps just outside Coron detection range. 5 ships sleek, silent, invisible to standard scanners. They targeted Brood Hall Zero's Prime, a breeding nest half the size of a moon, where millions of Coran larvae matured each cycle. It was supposed to be invulnerable, surrounded by asteroid defenses and auto turrets. But the Terrans didn't come through the front. They emerged from its shadow, where the Combine had never thought to guard. And then the Emberwake fired. The kinetic spear punched through 5 layers of shielding and broke the Hall's central core in half. The explosion didn't look like fire. It looked like light being swallowed. Every single larval chamber was lost. Thousands of biocores went cold. And still, the Terrans didn't speak. No comes, no warning, just silence and precision. The Combine scrambled to respond. Ships launched, fleets redirected, emergency war swarms assembled. But as they moved to protect Zero's Prime, the second strike hit Brood Spirekelt. Not from orbit, but from within. Terran infiltration units had already been inside for hours, wearing armor that mimicked shadow and heat alike. They moved like ghosts, planting fusion charges and signal jammers. The Coron security drones barely had time to detect them before the entire spire lit up from within. A chain reaction that turned the sky red over 6 neighboring sectors. And still, no human messages, no threats. Only action. By the time the Combine command nodes convened, 6 breeding halls were gone. Entire generations of war spawn erased before they ever hatched. Panic began to ripple, not just from destruction, but from the method. Terran ships vanished after each strike, jumping between shadows, never engaging in open battle. There was no line to meet, no fleet to corner, just the constant knowledge that they were already there, waiting, watching, choosing where to strike next. On the planet Chazak 4, a Koran sub-overseer named Rexal, veteran of 36 raids, activated planetary lockdown. He had survived against Kresh hunters and orbital pirates, but what he saw now chilled even his synthetic nerve fibers. He watched as Terran drones poured from the upper stratosphere like silver dust, each one guided by quantum AI, each programmed to disable, not conquer. They didn't aim for cities or structures. They targeted power junctions, command nexuses, fleet coordination nodes. Every light on Chazak 4 dimmed in perfect sequence, as if someone had drawn the breath out of the entire world dot, and then the Terrans arrived in person. Black-armored, drop units touched down in near-silent bursts, fanning out with precision. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't broadcast orders. They moved through the ruins of Koran facilities like phantoms, disabling weapon caches, deleting research cores, retrieving stolen data from Astervale, and extracting without a trace. Not one civilian was harmed. Not one biolab touched outside military control, because this wasn't conquest. This was justice, and justice had a code. Far above, on the bridge of the Terran dreadnought Fall of Silence, Fleet Marshal Orin Malek stood without speaking. His eyes studied each red mark on the projected star map. Every point was a Koran stronghold targeted for destruction. Around him, no crew shouted orders. Everything was calm. Terran warfighting had become art-deadly, efficient, and terrifyingly quiet. Orin did not believe in revenge. He believed in memory, and every move he made was not for glory, but for the 900,000 lives turned to dust. They thought the stars were theirs, he said softly. Now we'll show them. They were only borrowing light. The third wave struck the Combine's inner colonies, deeper than any enemy had ever reached. Terran stealth cruisers used stolen Koran protocols to pass undetected through gate nodes. The Combine didn't even know they'd been breached until 17 command nexuses collapsed at once. Entire planets lost contact. Warbroods screamed across networks, demanding answers. But no answers came. Only silence. The kind of silence Earth had endured when Astervale called for help. The Combine tried to retaliate. Ships launched. Skirmishes were attempted. But the Terran fleet had no center to target. It moved like wind, never where expected, never stopping. Always precise. And then came the final phase. Earthfleet broadcast, one final signal to the Combine's leadership, a single word in all dialects. Remember. Then they disappeared. The Terran ships withdrew just as suddenly as they had come. No territory taken, no colonies occupied. Just smoking wreckage, shattered war halls, and worlds left to process what had happened. The Koran Combine, once feared, as a borderless terror, was shattered. Not exterminated, broken. Left alive with no ability to strike again. Not because Earth showed mercy, but because Earth knew memory was the sharpest blade of all. Across the galaxy, the stars looked the same, but everyone knew they weren't. Because for 3 long days, they had burned the black dot, and the Combine learned. Far too late, what happens when humanity mourns with steel. The fire faded slowly, but the shadows it cast stretched far. Across the stars, the memory of what Earth had done to the Koran Combine echoed louder than any battle cry. They had struck like ghosts, vanished like storms, and left nothing but wreckage and silence. But what frightened the galaxy most was not just Earth's power, it was Earth's purpose. For every Koran war nest reduced to cinders, there was a survivor left behind to speak of it, not as a warning, but as a witness. No looting, no domination, no demands. Earth had come, struck, and left, not as invaders, but as a message. The Council still refused to name it. The old empires called it an anomaly, but the outer worlds, the forgotten, the exploited, the left behind, they began to whisper a different. Word. Hope. In the dust-choked towns of Varish 12. Traders lit candles in Terran steel cups, setting them in windows with the number 900,000 scratched into their doors. In the swamp cities of Etsitari, war-orphaned children learned to spell Earth in chalk on walls, not as a threat, but as a shield. Pirate kings who once ruled by fear now studied the void with caution, not because they expected Earth to return, but because they might. And that might change everything. On Earth, High Command did not celebrate. There were no parades, only quiet mourning halls and folded flags. But beneath that silence, something stirred. Operation Echo Flame began, not as a military project, but as a whisper across the Terran colonies. Engineers, diplomats, doctors, scientists all volunteering to join a new initiative, not one of war, but of watchfulness. Earth had seen enough of the galaxy's politics to know peace could not be begged for. It had to be built, brick by brick, system by system. And so they began laying foundations in the ashes. The first flame post rose above the ruins of Eredith Station, a neutral trade hub once ruled by corrupt syndicates. Earth rebuilt it with its own hands, laying down steel and shielding, installing life support that pulsed like a second heart. But there were no banners, no conqueror's creed, just a simple plaque at the center of its plaza, for the ones who called for help. Within weeks, refugees began to arrive, quietly, carefully, survivors of worlds long ignored by the Council. Orphans, scholars, and warriors without a flag. The flame post gave them food, gave them medicine, and above all, gave them choice. In the silence that followed the Koran collapse, Earth did something no one expected. They invited others in, not under Terran rule, but under shared purpose. A coalition of protectors, forged not in contracts, but in scars. They called it the Pact of Emerlite, not a government, not a fleet. A promise that when innocent blood cried out, someone would always answer. At first, the idea seemed naive. But then came the first test. On the edge of known space, the Korathi Enclave, a group of scavenger warlords, descended upon a small settlement called Kellen's Reach. It had no weapons, no allies, just 2,000 souls trying to farm soil under a pale sun. The Korathi, greedy for land and labor, moved in with 10 warships. By the time the Council received word, it was too late. But not for Earth. The response came in under 4 hours. 1 stealth corvette, 2 drop units. They didn't fire a single shot. They landed, stood between the Korathi and the townsfolk, and activated a pulse beacon, a signal that filled the sky with Tehran warning lights. The Korathi, recognizing the markings, withdrew without a word, because the last time they'd ignored that signal, half their fleet had vanished in silence. Word spread fast. The Pact had protected its first member world. And suddenly others wanted in, not because of Earth's strength, but because of its resolve. Even former enemies watched from a distance. The Sarkin Triarchate, once hostile to Earth's presence, now monitored flame posts and quietly withdrew from border tensions. The Darn Collective, who had once banned Terran ships from their ports, lifted the sanctions. Earth hadn't asked for peace. It had made war mean something. That, in itself, was enough to change the course of history. Inside Flamepost Delta, a young boy from a broken mining world ran his fingers across the names engraved into the central. Ring names of those lost at Astervale. His father had died there. But now he stood in a place built in that memory, surrounded by people who had come not to rule him, but to protect him. An engineer knelt beside him, adjusting his prosthetic arm, and said gently, "Your world mattered. That's why we're here." In that small moment, something shifted. Something deeper than vengeance. A quiet truth passed from one heart to another. Earth wasn't raising armies anymore. They were raising standards. Back at Earthfleet Command, Admiral Saria Vega stood in the Emberwatch chamber, watching the map light up with newly aligned systems. Not conquests, not empires, just worlds. Choosing to believe in something again. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Because Earth wasn't building an empire of fear. They were building a promise. And in a galaxy grown numb to pain, that promise was more terrifying than any fleet. Because it burned, and because it spread. There was a strange kind of peace after the fire. The kind that lingered not with comfort, but with unease. Across the stars, warlords who once thrived on fear grew silent. Fleets that once hunted the weak drifted quietly back to their docks. The Korang Combine, shattered and broken, no longer stirred. Earth's flame posts glowed brighter than ever, becoming new gathering grounds for the desperate, the hopeful, and the forgotten. The Pact of Emberlight expanded weekly new systems, sending volunteers, supplies, pledges. And yet, through it all, a silence felt wrong. A kind of quiet that wasn't peace at all. The kind that came before something much worse. Terran intelligence picked up the first anomaly at the edge of the Ghost Line, a dead sector of space long avoided even by pirates. A monitoring station meant to track rogue asteroid paths had gone. Dark. At first, Command dismissed it as a system's fault. But then 2 more disappeared. No alarms, no warnings. Just complete vanishing hardware, personnel, signal relays gone without trace. Earthfleet dispatched recon drones, each sent along a different route. None returned. That was the first time in years that High Command didn't release a public statement. They didn't know what to say. Because this wasn't a known enemy moving. It was something else. Admiral Vega stood in the central analysis chamber beneath Terran orbital defense, her face lit by the soft blue flicker of expanding signal blackouts. Entire regions, uncharted zones, old battlegrounds, and deep space. Anomalies were slowly going dark. Not destroyed, not jammed. Just missing. No data, no trace. The stars themselves remained in the sky, but all signs of life transmissions, echoes, radiation trails were vanishing from the record. "This isn't retreat," she said quietly, more to herself than to her officers. "This is erasure." Meanwhile, far beyond Flamepost Kelt, a merchant vessel stumbled upon a wreck. Not a Terran ship, not a Koran. Something old. Something no known species had used in centuries. A hull built from obsidian-like metal, twisted and melted, floating through empty space with no power but a lingering energy signature, one that didn't match anything in Terran or Council archives. The merchant crew didn't get close enough. To board, they scanned it once, and then turned back, transmitting their data to Earth with one message: "We shouldn't have found this." Vega's team ran the scans through every known threat profile. Nothing matched. No known language, no recognizable structure. Just a deep pulse, almost like a heartbeat, buried in the wreck's core. The ship hadn't been destroyed. It had woken up, or worse, been opened. And then, as Earth began to mobilize quietly, trying not to trigger panic among the colonies, the flame posts stopped receiving contact from systems along the deep rim. That's when the refugees started arriving. The first shuttle came limping into Flame Post Orison with half its systems offline. The crew, all civilians, refused to disembark at first. They were shaking, refusing food, speaking in broken bursts of terrified whispers. It took the sun, one man said. It ate it. We saw it fold in. The medic thought he was hallucinating, until the ship's black box revealed its last recorded feed, an image of a star glowing gold, pulsing, and then compressing impossibly fast, vanishing into nothing, with no heat burst or explosion, just absence. 1 second it was there, the next gone. Not even light remained. Word spread through Terran command, slowly but with urgency buried. Beneath every whisper, something ancient had moved. Something older than the Council, older than the Combine, older than war. And whatever it was removing entire regions from the map. The theory came not from a general, but a Xena historian, Dr. Yelena Heran. Her research into pre-Council ruins had long been dismissed as fringe science. But now, Vega listened closely as Heran described symbols found on ancient stone near forgotten gate worlds, shapes representing void, stillness, and stars that never returned. They weren't warnings, Heran said. They were memories. Something once came from beyond the spiral arms. Something that didn't kill for conquest, but because life made noise. And it hated noise. The implications sent a ripple of dread through every level of Terran leadership. For all Earth had achieved, all it had destroyed, this was different. The Combine had weapons. The warlords had ambition. But this wasn't an enemy. It was a force. An extinction-level silence. And so, Earth began to prepare. Ships were recalled from the outer posts. The Emberlight Pact was briefed in private. Flame posts increased their shielding and began installing classified early warning systems. Earthfleet launched Operation Watchtower, a widespread, coordinated net of listening beacons that stretched into dark space, designed not to fight, but to detect. And still, the stars grew quieter. But amid the quiet panic, something else began to grow. Resolve. Earth didn't hide its fears. It faced them. People across the pact didn't break, they built. New flame posts were erected in record time. Engineers from 5 species worked side by side to craft hybrid tech. For the first time in galactic history, a defense network formed not for territory, but for survival of all. They weren't building a wall, they were building a line. One no shadow would cross without cost inside the chambers of Earth's unity spire. The governing council passed a single measure unanimously. The Flame Protocol, a system-wide alert that would signal every packed world, every flame post, every outpost touched by the Emberlight. If triggered, it would call every Terran warship home, not to defend one planet, but to stand dashed together. As Vega looked out at the Earth from orbit, its soft blue light drifting over the curve of the moon, she wondered how long they had left. Days? Months? No one knew. But one thing was clear. The stars were whispering. And something out there was listening. It began with a flicker, one that crossed every sky at once. Flame posts across the galaxy, from the jungle moons of Ferris Ix to the ice rings of Keller Prime, blinked out for precisely 0.73 seconds, their luminous beacons cutting off as though the universe had taken a breath and held it. For civilians, it was too brief to notice. But for command centers, for Earthfleet, for those who'd been watching the stars in dread, it was the signal. Not an accident. Not an error. The flame posts were designed never to blink. That flicker had been hard-coded as the final warning. And then, without ceremony, without speech, without fanfare, the Flame Protocol activated. Every screen, every console, every Terran-linked vessel lit up with the symbol of a burning world, wrapped in wings of silver. One word followed. Now, there was no panic, no confusion, because Earth had prepared for this in silence, while others forgot what darkness really was. Deep in the outer arms, beyond even the ghost line, the anomaly had arrived. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a void. A spreading absence that moved like slow lightning, swallowing stars, erasing systems, devouring matter without heat or sound. It wasn't traveling, it was consuming. And it was coming for the core. On Flamepost Cult, Ambassador Tanare of the Solari Confederacy stared at the readings with eyes wide and breath caught. "It's not just space," she whispered. "It's taking time. It's undoing what existed." She turned toward the Terran envoy, a quiet man named Lucas Grant, who stood unmoving, his hand already reaching for the activation code. "Will, you run?" she asked. Lucas shook his head once. "We don't run," he said. "We light the fire." And then, with a single press, he triggered the full ignition of Kelt's defense beacon. Within seconds, 16 other posts did the same. The Pact was calling home its shield. The Earth fleet moved like breath, quiet, deep, and unstoppable. Over 400 warships launched from staging sectors across 3 arms of the galaxy. Dreadnoughts, stealth carriers, modular strike lances, all bound by encrypted quantum code. Civilians were evacuated before the enemy even arrived. Flamepost engineers stayed behind, not because they were ordered to, but because someone had to hold the line. Across the packed worlds, people stood atop their homes, looking to the stars not with fear, but with defiance. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew who would face it first. At the front of the Terran formation, the fall of silence drifted like a shadow among stars, its hull rippling with energy. Fleet Marshal Orin Malik stood alone on the bridge's viewing platform, watching as the void drew nearer. It didn't look like a fleet. It looked like a wound in the galaxy. No emissions, no propulsion, just a rolling distortion, cracking the light as if space itself were being shattered. "We're not here to win," he said quietly, voice steady. "We're here to show the others it's possible to stand." Around him, officers made no speeches. They simply prepared. Because the ones who had survived Aster Vale, the ones who had buried their families beneath red suns, were not fighting out of duty. They were fighting because they remembered silence, and they refused to let it return. The first contact came. Suddenly. Not a blast, not a weapon, but the complete collapse of Beacon Virith, a monitoring station on the edge of the fold. One moment it was there, the next dust. The anomaly surged forward. The flame posts lit their final stage, pulse shields built from hybrid Terran-packed energy matrices. It wasn't enough to stop the void, but it was enough to slow it. And slowing it gave Earthfleet time. Then the weapons fired. Kinetic lances, designed to puncture asteroid shells, gravity destabilizers, light wave detonators, planet cracker torpedoes that had never been used in open war. Earth threw everything. And for a moment, just a breath, the anomaly staggered. Ripples formed along its edge, not damage, but reaction. Something within had felt the fire. And then it struck back. An entire Terran cruiser vanished mid-broadcast. The crew's last recorded transmission was not a scream, but music. A lullaby from Earth, played during child evacuation drills. It was cut off in perfect silence. Another flame post winked out, and then another. But the line held. For every ship lost, 2 more pushed forward. The Pact joined them. Solari gunwings, Hachachari crystal skiffs, even rogue Krathan fleets that once raided Terran outposts now turned their guns toward the void. It was the first time in known history that every species, every culture, every language, every voice stood not apart, but together. Not because of treaties, not because of threats, but because Earth had shown them how. And then, when all else had failed, the Emberlight Spire activated. It was humanity's last safeguard. A shipyard converted into a singularity cannon, built beneath the crust of Mercury itself. A weapon meant never to be fired. Until now, its charge took 11 minutes. The galaxy watched, and then, without warning, it unleashed its core. The beam cracked through the anomaly, carving it in half, folding space around its wound like peeling a scar open. And in that moment, they saw inside, not creatures, not machines, but memory. Frozen, ancient memory of galaxies devoured long ago, of stars erased before history began, of civilizations that had once whispered the same things. It won't find us. We'll be safe. We'll be silent. But Earth hadn't been silent. Earth had answered, and the void. For the first time in millennia, recoiled across the flame posts, cheers rose, not of victory, but of survival. The anomaly didn't die, but it stopped. And as Earth fleet regrouped, battered and burning, the darkness began to pull back. Not gone, never gone, but halted. For now, and at the edge of it all, Fleet Marshal Malik turned his eyes toward Earth. "Let them remember," he whispered. "We stood first." And the stars? Quiet again, did not forget.